Well, hello, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Stephen. So, this week's blog is entitled The Ring. Many of you know, especially if you saw last week's blog where I was putting up the video from an airport lounge. Sandy and I had traveled back to West Point last weekend for what is called Ring Weekend. And I wrote the blog about Ring Weekend because I thought there were well, let me back up. In addition to the fact that many of you always ask kind of like how our daughter is doing at West Point and sort of the state of the core and everything like that, um, I saw in a ceremony that we participated in something that was somewhat, well, transcendent would probably be the best way to describe it. So I wrote about it in the blog. It's called The Ring. I'll give you a little bit of an explanation. Most of you who went to college, candidly, didn't buy class rings. I certainly didn't. But those of you who did most likely ended up buying your class ring and getting it towards the end of your final year at whatever institution you were at. The military academy is a little bit different. All of the kids get class rings, and they get those class rings, interestingly enough, at the very beginning of their last year. And there's a reason for this. The Corps of Cadets is divided up into four separate classes. In regular traditional school, these would be called freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. At the military academy, they're called plebes, yucks, cows, and firsties. I'm sure there's an variable reason for this, but nonetheless, that's how they're described. Now, a plebe is the equivalent of a private in the Army. Yuck is the equivalent of a corporal. A cow is the equivalent of a sergeant. And when they become firsties, they leave the enlisted ranks and they actually join the officer corps. Now, not the officer corps in the big army. That's still a few months away. That's not going to happen until they graduate and they're commissioned to second lieutenants. When they're firsties, they are officers within the Corps of Cadets. Essentially, our daughter Cheney is the functional equivalent of a second lieutenant, and she's in command of a platoon. Some of these young cadet officers are regimental commanders. They get all mixed up. It's part of the leadership training experience. Well, as a cadet officer, they're expected to wear their class rings. And like I said, it's very, very ceremonial. In fact, the ring itself is very ceremonial. You don't really own a class ring from West Point. It's essentially on loan to you for life. And when you ultimately pass, hopefully many, many years from graduation, a lot of family members are expected to return that class ring back to West Point. And this is where it gets interesting. That ring is then melted down and incorporated into the molds of that next year's class. So you have molecules, if you will, of all sorts of old grads that had originally come from West Point in the class rings themselves. So, Patton and MacArthur and, Bradley, all of their atoms of their rings are sort of spewed throughout the entire Corps of Cadets. And this is part of what is referred to as the long gray line. The Corps of Cadets is based on a principle that you have graduates going all the way back to 1803, and they sort of develop a continual line of guardians of the Constitution of the United States. Now, the other aspect of all this ceremonial stuff, and this is what got me thinking, is that a ceremony only has value if there is sort of a future that it predicts. Okay, if there is no future, then it's just nostalgia. It's reminiscing about the past. But if you're actually engaged in a ceremony, it means that there's a predictive value of the future, and that long gray line is a predictive component. Our daughter is a link, or will soon be a link, in that long gray line. but she's not the end cap. There will be others that will follow beyond her, this sort of ever continuing chain of defenders of the Constitution and protectors of the United States of America. It's somewhat comforting, to tell you the truth, and also extraordinarily interesting. We're very, very proud of everything that the entire Corps of Cadets has been able to accomplish over the last 3 years. It's been spectacular watching them as they've matured and grown, not only as individuals, but also as, well, to be blunt, warriors. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the blog. I think you'll find it interesting. For my older daughter, who's constantly reminding me, do subscribe to this channel. I've never actually asked you to do that before, and she's constantly admonishing me that I should. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you do get updated when these videos come out. You can always read the blog if you don't get it in your email box by going to artemishq.com on Wednesday morning. That's when the blog will be posted. As always, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.